The mountains of the Helmand province in Afghanistan are often described by those who patrol them as beautiful in a way that feels cold, indifferent, and ancient. It is a landscape of jagged slate and dust that seems to swallow history, but for the members of Unit Bravo, it became a grave for reality itself. If you enjoy digging into the classified shadows of military history and uncovering the truth behind the files the government wants buried, make sure to subscribe to Black Archive and join our investigation into the unseen. The account you are about to hear is drawn from redacted field reports and suppressed testimonials regarding the disappearance and subsequent return of Sergeant Mark Rivers. It is a story that defies the laws of physics and biology, suggesting that some doors, once opened, can never be shut again. The incident began on a Tuesday that started with a standard reconnaissance mission. The objective was a suspected munitions cache tucked into a labyrinthine cave system high in the Hindu Kush range. Mark Rivers was the lead scout for Unit Bravo, a man known for his sharp intuition and an almost unnerving calm under fire. He was the kind of soldier who moved through hostile terrain as if he were part of the geography itself. The unit consisted of 5 men, all veterans of multiple tours, accustomed to the rhythmic brutality of war. They reached the coordinates just as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley floor. The air was thin and bitingly cold, thick with the scent of ozone, a smell that did not belong in a remote mountain pass. There were no insurgents in sight, yet the silence was heavy, vibrating with a frequency that made the men's teeth ache. Mark Rivers moved ahead of the team, his headlamp cutting a narrow beam through the gathering gloom of the cave entrance. He signaled for the others to wait while he conducted a perimeter check. The team watched him disappear into the mouth of the cave, his silhouette dark against the pale limestone. Minutes passed without a sound. Suddenly, a flash of blue light erupted from deep within the mountain, not the red-orange bloom of a conventional explosion, but a silent, blinding cerulean flare that bleached the color from the sky. The blast wave did not throw rocks or debris. Instead, it seemed to fold space for a fraction of a second. The members of Unit Bravo were thrown against the cave wall, their ears ringing with a sound like grinding glass. When the light faded, the cave entrance was gone, sealed by a perfectly smooth slab of obsidian-like rock that had not been there moments before. The unit spent 3 hours frantically digging at the wall, their equipment failing, their radios emitting only static that sounded like human weeping. They assumed Mark Rivers was vaporized. The mission was a failure, a tactical disaster, and the military command ordered an immediate extraction. They were pulled out by helicopter 3 hours later, the mountain behind them silent and mocking. The official report filed the next morning declared Sergeant Mark Rivers presumed dead, a casualty of an accidental detonation of an unknown chemical explosive, but the mountain had not finished with them. 2 days later, a patrol team scouting the same sector reported a man walking toward the base perimeter in the middle of the desert. He was alone, he was unarmed, and he was Mark Rivers. When the medical team reached him, they found him standing perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a patch of empty sky. His uniform was shredded, yet his skin was untouched by burns or shrapnel. He was breathing, but his pulse was rhythmic in a way that felt mechanical. When the medics tried to intervene, he didn't fight back, he simply didn't acknowledge their presence. He was brought into the infirmary, and that was when the true terror began for the members of Unit Bravo. They visited him frequently, hoping for some closure, but the man lying in the bed was a stranger wearing their friend's face. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it wasn't English. He uttered low, rhythmic syllables that sounded like water rushing over stone mixed with the high-pitched whine of electronic interference. The medical staff noted that Mark Rivers never blinked. He would sit in a chair, staring at the ceiling or the sky through the small window in his room for 12 or 14 hours at a time. Tests showed his brain activity was off the charts, flickering in patterns that the neurospecialists claimed were impossible for a human mind. He seemed to be processing data, or perhaps communicating with something that wasn't in the room. His fellow soldiers, the men who had served with him for years, described the sensation of being in his presence as claustrophobic. They felt like they were being scanned, analyzed by something that occupied a space behind Mark Rivers' eyes. He didn't recognize his own gear, his own dog tags, or even the photograph of his wife that sat on the bedside table. His identity had been overwritten, erased by the blue light of the cave. The military brass arrived on the fourth day. They didn't come to provide medical care. They came with black containment units and armed guards who didn't wear unit patches. The infirmary was placed on total lockdown. The members of Unit Bravo were interrogated for 48 hours, asked repeatedly about the smell of the ozone, the color of the light, and whether Mark Rivers had touched anything inside the cave. They were told to forget what they saw, told that the incident was a classified weapons test gone wrong, and that Mark Rivers was a high-value asset now. Then, they were transferred to separate bases across the globe, effectively dismantling the unit. The story takes an even darker turn when one considers the security footage retrieved by an anonymous source years later. The cameras in the infirmary recorded Mark Rivers on his last night. In the footage, the room lights flicker in perfect sync with the rhythmic sound he was making. At 03 Guao, he stands up from his bed. He walks to the center of the room and reaches out toward the solid concrete wall. His hand seems to pass through the surface as if it were liquid. He doesn't struggle. He simply steps forward and disappears, leaving behind only a faint, lingering scent of burnt ozone. When the guards burst into the room seconds later, they found only a room that was physically impossible to escape, with no signs of a forced exit. Years later, deep state researchers and former intelligence officers have pieced together fragments of what truly happened beneath the Hindu Kush. The theory is that the cave was not a cave at all, but an ancient, dormant interface, a bridge to a place or a consciousness that exists outside our dimensional constraints. The explosion wasn't an accident, it was a reactivation. Mark Rivers walked into a space that demanded a price, and that price was his humanity. He was returned as a vessel, a beacon that had been calibrated to receive transmissions from a source that humanity is not meant to understand. The military didn't lose Mark Rivers. They realized they had created a doorway they could no longer control. Today, the files on the Afghanistan incident remain among the most heavily redacted in the history of the Department of Defense. Every few years, a blip appears in the Signal Intelligence Reports, a series of frequencies detected in the middle of nowhere that match the vocal patterns recorded in that infirmary. Some believe he's still out there, walking through the shadows of the world, no longer a man, but an observation post for something that has been watching us since the dawn of time. The mountains of Afghanistan still hold their secrets, and the blast sites are now monitored by automated sensors that trigger whenever the air turns to ozone. We are left to wonder what happened to the man who was once a hero of Unit Bravo. Was he a sacrifice, or was he a scout for an invasion that doesn't use weapons, but uses the very fabric of our reality to dismantle us from within? The truth is rarely found in the official briefings. It is found in the gaps between the facts, in the stories that men are too afraid to tell, and in the silence of those who returned from the dark and never quite came back. What we found in that mountain was not just a mystery. It was an invitation to a future we aren't equipped to survive. The story does not end with the disappearance of Mark Rivers. It continues in every unexplained signal, every strange light in the desert, and every soldier who comes back from a mission with eyes that have seen too much. You have to ask yourself why the government goes to such lengths to bury these events. It isn't just about protecting secrets, it is about protecting the fragile illusion that we are alone. As you reflect on this, look closer at the world around you. There are things happening in the quiet corners of this planet that don't belong in our timeline. If you found this investigation into the Afghanistan incident as unsettling as we did, do not forget to like this video, share it with those who value the truth, and subscribe to Black Archive. Turn on those notifications, because the next dossier we open might be the one that shifts reality for us all. We are always watching the archives, and we will be here to translate the darkness when the next report finally hits the light. There is more to the story than they will ever tell you, and we will be here to reveal it, one shadow at a time. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and keep questioning what they call the truth. The files we have just reopened suggest that Mark Rivers wasn't merely an anomaly, but the first successful bridge. While the official narrative focuses on the explosion and the subsequent search and rescue operations, internal documents that leaked through the DeepNet archives paint a far more harrowing picture. There were others in that valley, men who were never listed on any roster, soldiers who were trained in facilities that don't officially exist under the jurisdiction of a branch of intelligence so deeply buried that even the Joint Chiefs of Staff have no clearance to view their mission parameters. These men were not looking for an enemy combatant or a cache of weapons. They were looking for a doorway. The mountain range in Afghanistan, specifically the sector designated as Site 9, was chosen because of the anomalies in the localized magnetic field. For decades, local villagers spoke of the singing stones, a phenomenon where the rock formations would emit a low-frequency hum during thunderstorms. Geologists dismissed this as wind passing through porous limestone, but the tactical teams knew better. They knew that when the frequency hit a certain pitch, the air density would fluctuate, causing light to bend in ways that defied classical physics. What they were recording was not just sound, but a visual manifestation of a rift in the spatial continuum. When Rivers went into that cave, he wasn't just walking into the Earth, he was walking into a transit zone. Look at the satellite imagery from the night of the incident. You can see the heat signatures of the unit, and then, at 300 hours, you see a massive spike in energy that doesn't correspond to any conventional explosive. It was a cold energy. It didn't burn, it absorbed. It drank the light from the night vision goggles, shorted out the satellite relays, and created a vacuum that pulled everything within a 50-meter radius toward an epicenter that was effectively a hole in the fabric of the mountain. The aftermath was sanitized with clinical efficiency. The entire valley was designated as a restricted zone for seismic research, and the local population was relocated under the guise of an impending insurgent offensive. But the cleanup crews didn't just remove rubble, they recovered biological samples that had been altered at a molecular level. One report, typed on a typewriter to avoid digital metadata, describes the state of the equipment found near the site. The rifles were turned to a substance that resembled oxidized glass, and the personal effects of the soldiers were fused together in a way that implies they were subjected to intense gravity manipulation. We have to consider the possibility that we are being observed by entities that exist in a state of phase shifting. They aren't living on another planet. They are living in the vibrations between our seconds. They observe our history as if it were a static display. And when we get too close to the seams of their reality, they take corrective measures. Mark Rivers was a corrective measure. He was pulled into that void not because he was a target, but because he was a witness who could no longer be allowed to exist in our flow of time. This isn't the only instance of this happening. Throughout the late 20th century, there have been recorded events in the Ural Mountains, the Atacama Desert, and the deep ocean trenches near the Mariana Islands. In every instance, there is a common thread. high-energy events that defy thermodynamics, followed by a total media blackout and a wave of psychological warfare designed to discredit those who saw the truth. The pattern is so precise that it suggests an external force managing the terrestrial narrative, ensuring that humanity remains focused on the petty squabbles of geopolitics rather than the existential reality that our world is a closed system undergoing constant, silent experimentation. We have spoken with a former contractor who worked at a facility in Nevada known only as the Glass House. He spent years analyzing the signals that were broadcast from the Afghan mountain site after the incident. He described the transmissions as a form of non-linear geometry. It wasn't code that could be cracked by standard encryption algorithms. It was a visual language that caused those watching it to experience severe neurological trauma. He told us that after looking at the data, he could no longer perceive the color blue, and his dreams were replaced by static that felt like memories of a different life. He is one of the few who survived the exposure, and he refuses to talk to anyone but those who have seen the patterns themselves. He believes that the entity at the center of this, the thing that took Mark Rivers, is not interested in war. It is interested in collection. It is harvesting the consciousness of those who come into contact with it to populate its own artificial reality. The implications are terrifying. If this is true, then our greatest heroes, our lost explorers, and our vanished soldiers are not dead. They are trapped in a state of perpetual existence in a dimension we cannot access. They are the livestock of a higher dimensional power, and we are blissfully unaware because our instruments are calibrated to see only what the controllers want us to see. Every time you feel like you are being watched, every time you have a sense of déjà vu that feels more like a glitch in your perception, you are experiencing the periphery of their influence. Why does the government bury this? Because the alternative is admitting that they are not in control. The powers that be, the ones who pull the strings in the corridors of power, know that they are merely puppets in a much larger stage play. They keep the public in the dark not to protect us from fear, but to maintain the illusion of human supremacy. If the populace knew that their lives were being manipulated by forces that view us as nothing more than biological data, the entire social order would collapse. Markets would crash, religions would crumble, and the very concept of governance would be rendered obsolete. We have spent months piecing together the fragmented logs from the unit that replaced Bravo. Their mission was to retrieve the databanks left behind, but they were given orders to destroy everything if they encountered any signs of residual activity. They found nothing. The cave was empty. The walls were scrubbed clean of all biological matter, as if time itself had been wiped from the stone. But they did find one thing that was not listed in the inventory. A single small metallic object that vibrated at a frequency which caused the surrounding air to turn to frost. They brought it back, and it sits now in a vault in a climate-controlled facility, waiting for the day when the signal comes again. The incident in Afghanistan was a warning, a flare fired into the dark to let us know that the borders of our world are permeable. We have been living on borrowed time, operating under the assumption that our laws of physics are inviolable. But the truth is much older and much colder than that. We are a project that is being monitored, and the monitoring is reaching its final phase. If we continue to ignore the evidence, if we continue to mock those who bring these stories to light, we are only accelerating the day when the wall between our reality and theirs finally gives way. This is why we do what we do at Black Archive. We look at the shadows that others ignore. We listen to the frequencies that others call noise. We know that the truth is rarely a single coherent narrative. It is a mosaic of fragments scattered across time and memory, waiting to be assembled by those who are brave enough to look at the picture they form. The story of Mark Rivers is not a mystery to be solved. It is a key that unlocks the door to a truth that will change everything you believe about your place in the universe. Do not look away. Do not let them convince you that this is just another conspiracy theory. This is the reality of the architecture we inhabit, and the more you learn, the more you will understand that the silence in the archives is not an absence of information, but a deliberate choice to keep you from seeing the horizon. The next report is coming soon, and when it arrives, it will be the most significant piece of evidence we have ever uncovered. Stay tuned, stay awake, and keep your focus on the gaps between the lies. We are the ones who record the history they try to erase, and we will continue to do so until the final shadow is pulled back to reveal the light. Your journey into the deeper truth has only just begun, and we will be here, guarding the archives, waiting for the moment when the world finally realizes that we have never been alone. Before you go, I'd really like to hear what you think about this case. I always read the comments and I try to reply to your suggestions whenever I can, so tell me down below. What city and country are you watching from? And be honest with me, what would you have done if you were in Mark Rivers' place, or in the place of the men from Unit Bravo? After seeing something like that inside that mountain, would you have kept digging for answers? Would you have followed orders in silence? And one of the hardest questions of all, would you have agreed to cover up what they witnessed, even knowing the truth might be buried forever? If stories like this stay in your mind the way they stay in mine, subscribe and become part of the Black Archive family. No pressure, but if you want to keep following more narrated reports like this in the future, more hidden files, more military mysteries, and more unsettling cases that make us question the reality around us, you're always welcome here. Thank you, sincerely, for staying with me until the end. And take some time to watch the other narrated reports already posted on the channel, because each one adds another piece to this darker picture we've been trying to uncover. These stories were very difficult to find, and so were the sources, fragments, and testimonies behind them. And to be completely honest with you, we cannot fully verify the truth of everything that was said here. But cases like this force us to stop and think about something much bigger than a single military file. What if the world is far older, stranger, and less human than we have ever been told? We'll see you in the next archive. Stay alert to the shadows.